theater, but it's still going to be a great lecture, and we're really lucky to have Amir Fallah here. I'm going to read straight from his bio from his website, because there's a lot of dense information here, and it's pretty darn impressive, so I don't want to get anything wrong. But Amir is an artist living and working in Los Angeles. When he isn't in the studio painting, he's busy publishing Beautiful Decay, which many of you might have heard of, an art and design publication. Amir received his BFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art and his MFA from UCLA in 2005. He's exhibited nationally and internationally. They include Weatherspoon Art Museum. You're going to have to help me, I'm sorry.
Sharjah Biennial.
The Sharjah Biennial in 2009, the LA Louvre, maybe you've heard of it, the Third Line, Frey Norris, Cherry and Martin, and Frederick Taylor. Just a long list of really great galleries that we visited yesterday. He's been a visiting lecturer at Columbia College, USC, UCLA, Cleveland Institute of Art, Cal State, University of New Mexico, Otis, and Maryland Institute of Art and Design, and now we have him here. So this is a world-class lecturer and a world-class lecture that we get, and you were there when it was in that tiny little space. And it's
a lot of pressure.
I know. Sorry, it's just really good. So I want to do it justice. So if you guys would assist me in welcoming Amir. Gloria.
Hi guys, thanks for coming. All right, I think we gotta wait maybe a minute or so for it to kick in. Well, while that's warming up, I think that's working.
Yeah, okay.
So I do a couple of different things, and so I thought what I would do is start with the artwork, and then towards the end go into a little bit about Beautiful Decay and a couple of other projects I've been doing recently. And I didn't do this in the past, but recently I decided to show some work from my undergrad, especially if it's in a school setting, just so you can see how much my work has kind of changed. And I kind of like to think of it as, now that I look back at the work, the stuff that I was doing in undergrad, I really liked. And I think there's still some interesting stuff happening in there, although it wasn't very refined. And then I went to grad school, and although I enjoyed it and I wouldn't have traded it for anything, it really screwed with my head. And then I feel that just in the last couple of years, I've kind of gone back to normal. And it's interesting because my work in undergrad loosely relates to the work that I'm doing now. So some people think this is a bad thing to do, to show like really, really bad early work. But I don't know. I think it could be interesting and maybe give some people that are having some hard times in school, a little bit of hope, or maybe not. So anyway, this is a installation that I did. I want to say this was 1999 or maybe 2000. This is at the New York Studio School, the New York Studio Program, which is in New York City. I went to college in Baltimore for painting, but they had this exchange program in New York City where you could take, pretty much it was almost like you would go to graduate school. It was like junior grad school. And you would get a big studio, and you would have studio visits every week with different influential New York artists, and you could kind of be like a real artist for 6 months. And so I went up there from Baltimore not knowing anything about the art world. This was a piece that I did other work while I was there, but this is a piece that I worked on almost the entire 6 months. So just a little background. I got into fine art through graffiti art, pretty much. And I did graffiti art all the way through, like 2005. So I was always involved in it, and I kind of had my hands in these two different worlds where by day I was going to art school and learning about all the academics and getting my art history, and then at night I would go and paint graffiti all over the place. So I kind of lived this weird double life for a while. And so my studio practice was heavily influenced by graffiti art. I mean, obviously, I was really inspired by, you know, painters like Barry McGee and, you know, other people who were kind of bringing some of the street elements into the studio. But one thing that I was also interested in back then was creating these cultural hybrids. It's a little bit hard to tell in this photo because this is back when we took slides, and so it's kind of like grainy, but I brought a little laser pointer. So like that little thing right there, that's actually, it's a drawing of like a Target or a Walmart mixed with like an Islamic mosque. So it's like a Target with like a dome on top of it. And so I started painting these like weird like hybrids of different places. Like there's like another one. And the reason I started doing that was I grew up in Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., in the suburbs. My neighborhood had no sidewalks. It was a very conservative suburban setting. But I was really into all the stuff that was happening in the city. So I was interested in punk rock and graffiti art and skateboarding and all these, you know, subculture things that were happening outside of where I lived. So I wanted to combine some of those elements with some of the cultural things that were in my life. So being someone that's Iranian but growing up in America, there's all these like weird cultural, you know, you kind of turn into this cultural hybrid where you're not really American and you're not really Iranian. You're kind of this weird mix. And so, you know, in America, I never feel fully American, but in Iran, if I went to Iran, I wouldn't feel Iranian either. So these shopping center mosque buildings were kind of like these combinations of these two cultures kind of colliding and me trying to force them into each other. And then there was like other areas like that little thing. It just looks like a blob in the photo, but there's these, it's text and it's written kind of like in a graffiti, like kind of tag style, but it's phonetically sounding out Farsi. And also the content is lyrics from various punk rock bands. So like, you know, I was really into this band, Minor Threat. So a lot of the lyrics are like Minor Threat lyrics, but they're phonetically sounded out in Farsi. And part of the reason that I did that was I wanted to create my own language that was like a literal hybrid of all my interests and all the influences in my life. So it was a language that only someone who knew something about graffiti and could kind of like decipher the letters could read, but then they would have to also be Iranian to like be able to phonetically sound out the letters, and then to get what the lyrics meant, they would have to kind of be influenced by punk rock or know about it or know who the band is. So it was just a way of me making a language. So this is the work that I pretty much got into grad school at UCLA with. And so I did a bunch of these. This is the first piece that I did in my studio at UCLA, and it's a timeline of every girl that I had ever dated until that point. So it starts here, and it started like first grade, like literally my first like 2-day crush that I had, and it went this way, and it went into this little hole, and it came out that one, and it kind of spewed onto the ground, and it ended with love can't save us now. And so like you can see there's a name, Orietta, right? So her name is also here because I dated her twice. This is when I was 14, and then this is when I was 21. And so I had this really big, messy breakup right before I got to UCLA, so that we're here. And so all my artwork was about this like failed relationship, you know. So all the work was always really personal. It was always about me and my experiences. You know, even though, you know, I was in my 20s, I still had this kind of like teen angsty kind of vibe to it. And I remember I had a studio visit. It was a group class with Kathy Opie. And if you know her work, you know, it's dates with human sexuality. And there was like a lot of like, the class was like me and like 10 ultra feminist girls, and they came in and looked at this and they all thought I was completely nuts. And you know, we got into this like for me, this was just like a way of me dealing with this relationship. But all the girls started talking about the female gaze in art history and what it meant to the work, and you know, and a couple of them said that it looked like a mural that like a crazy, like obsessed, like stalker would make. But in my eyes, it was very innocent. It was just like me making this record of all these relationships, you know. So anyway, so this is what I was making when I first got into grad school. And by the time I got out of there, the work had changed drastically. And the reason it did that was the UCLA program is, it's very open and free. So you could make nothing for 3 years and get a degree and have straight A's. So in that way, it's easy. But then it's got this huge history of all these successful artists that have graduated from it. And you got, you know, John Baldessari and Kathy Opie and Larry Pittman coming into your studio and giving you their 2 cents. And, you know, like I'm like a young artist. I was very young when I was in grad. I was like 22. So, you know, I was like, I don't know anything. These people know everything. But if they tell me to do something, I'm going to do it, you know? And so I really couldn't like stand up for my work because I was like, what do I know? You know, if John Baldessari tells me don't do this, I'm going to listen to him because he's John Baldessari. And so by the time I was done, I was making these really, really minimal paintings of rooms with piles of rocks. Like literally, that's and like literally every year during this 3 years, I just kept ripping stuff out of my work. Like, you know, like I took the text out because some people had problems with the text, and I took, you know, some of the more overt references to graffiti out because, you know, some people have problems with that, and I almost couldn't defend my own work, and so I just kept reducing and reducing and reducing, and I ended up with these rooms, and to me, they were these like psychological spaces. The rooms were, like here's another one. They were these spaces where it wasn't daytime or nighttime. It wasn't a specific place. There were, you know, I kind of think of the paintings of Francis Bacon, where he had these rooms where all these like bizarre events would happen, and it kind of was the same thing for me. So I wanted this room where these things were getting built up and then being broken down. And at that time, I didn't really think about it in that way, but really that's what I was doing in grad school. Like, I would like build myself up 1 month, you know, and I like come up with some idea I wanted to do, and then, you know, and some professor would come in and be like, no, this sucks, and I would just, everything would crumble, you know. Like Larry Pittman would come in there and be like, no, you can't do this. This looks bad. And then for the next month, I'd be like stunted, and so it was really confusing for me. So by the time I graduated, you know, some of the people that were older in the program, I think they had their practice more together, but I was still, you know, I was like 24 or 25 by the time I graduated, and I feel like I needed more time. So I took about a year, and one day I got this email from a gallery in Dubai. Nothing was happening in LA at all. I got this random email from a gallery in Dubai. I didn't know where Dubai was. This is like 2006. People had just started hearing about Dubai, and after making a few phone calls and figuring out where Dubai was, you know, I accepted this offer to show at a gallery in Dubai called The Third Line. So they flew me out, and next thing I knew, I was in Dubai, and you know, I was going to have this show. And so for the show in Dubai, I had been making. I went back to kind of thinking about things that were influencing me at that time. And something that I was looking at a lot was watching a lot of the news, and I kept, you know, there's like this ongoing, you know, debate about the Middle East and Taliban, Al Qaeda, and you know, and I started, you know, I was like obsessed with CNN. I was watching it nonstop, and you know, there would be these like images of like, you know, this guy hanging out, this guy who I have nothing in common with, but I would kind of be pigeonholed with. And he's like hanging out in this weird cave, or, you know, bombs going off in these like mud huts. And I was also like watching all these documentaries about like slums in India and favelas in Brazil. And something was attracting me to images like this. And I just realized this right now. I'd never thought about this before, but this actually really relates to these paintings where things are kind of like in piles and rubble. I never noticed that until right this second. So anyways, so I was looking at stuff like that, and then I was also thinking about my childhood in Virginia, where me and my friends would run into the woods and we would build forts and tree houses and little bunkers, and these spaces would be, you know, like, I think most kids do this, but I identified it as like a very male thing to do, to go into the woods and build these, take scrap wood and build these like structures, and it would be these like spaces where imaginary things would happen, where you could let go of reality and pretend, you know, whether you're pretending to be cops and robbers or aliens or, you know, what have you, or look at like a Playboy. You know, you would go to this place and do things you weren't supposed to do, or play pretend. And I thought that was also like one of my interests, and I kept going back between these images and seeing some similarities. And then at that same time, we had just moved into a new place, and I had started collecting cacti and succulents and really becoming enamored with the human-like nature of these plants. Because if you're from the East Coast, you know, we don't, you know, they die in the winter. So I was used to like rose bushes and, you know, just regular boring plants that don't really have any personality to me. So I never had like a green thumb or anything. I never cared about plants, but I started collecting these like cactuses and things like that. And so I just took these 3 different things that I was kind of interested in, you know, and kind of taking photos of, and I started combining them in my paintings. And so I came up with this work, which was, I started painting these imaginary like little huts or tree houses in these desolate landscapes with these, you know, like cactus plants. And there was never figures in the paintings. It was always, the plants became kind of placeholders for people. And they were also influenced a lot by Persian miniature paintings and the way that they kind of tilt upward, and the perspective is kind of like messed up and it's stacked instead of receding back. And also like with these borders, which you'll see in a lot of my paintings. So there would be these decorative borders that would weave in and out of the paintings. And the borders were something that I saw when I was looking at this book about the history of Persian miniature painting. And in this book, it said that these decorative borders on Persian miniatures were supposed to be these portals or windows into the narrative of whatever the artwork was, you know. So if it was like a scene with some guys battling, it was supposed to be this like literal window into that world. And to me, that kind of related to contemporary painting, where, you know, the canvas's edge is where the illusion of the image ends. And I kind of wanted to bring the viewer's attention to the edge of the work, because where most paintings and drawings kind of fade and the story's supposed to, you know, go on over here, I was never interested in making images that kind of continued forever. I wanted to cram every single thing that was in the painting, that was important in the painting, onto the surface. And I just wanted you to focus on that surface and not let your imagination go to some other place. So here's another painting. So this one's more like a still life. I kind of think of this as more like a classic portrait of the plant, and this one's more like figure in the landscape. And this work is all on canvas, but it's paper mounted to canvas and painted on top. And it's acrylic, it's watercolor, it's ink, colored pencils. It's a whole mixture of things. So after a while of doing these paintings, I wanted to do a large sculpture, but I had a loose idea that I wanted to do some sort of fort similar to the images in my paintings. I just wanted to recreate these like structures that I made when I was a kid. And so I had the opportunity to show at LA Louvre, and for a group show called Rogue Wave, and I built this, which is, it's roughly 16 feet high, plus another 12 feet if you count the flagpole. And it's kind of like the self-contained little hut or house or shack. And the outside is painted camouflage, and the inside is fluorescent orange, so kind of like a hunting vest. And then the front of it, I don't know if you can tell with the glare, but there's actually a piece of plexi. So there's actually like a piece of plexi right here that covers the front. And I did that because I was thinking a lot about like Joseph Cornell's boxes, you know, as like little dioramas. And I didn't want it to be an installation. I wanted it to be a massive object. So I I didn't want the viewer to be able to interact with going inside or poking around. I wanted to just be this large object. And it's also playing off the idea of a terrarium, which relates to like the cactuses. You know, they're like these self-contained habitats. So that's why there's that hole in the ceiling. So at like noon, sunlight would directly shine onto the plants that are in the center of the cabin. So it was a self-contained terrarium, like, but on a massive scale. And all the wood is found wood. The paint I got, it's like mistake paint from Home Depot. I tried to not spend a lot of money on it because I kind of wanted to keep in touch with that that idea of like being a kid and not having a lot of money and like pulling stuff out of a dumpster. So the whole thing's built on a pallet. You can see there's pallets inside. The plants, most of the plants were donated to me off of Craigslist. The dirt was from like my backyard. And the flag, there's a little flag on the pole at the top which aligns with the second story of the gallery. And it's actually, I stole a pair of my my now wife, then girlfriend's, her underwear. It's fluorescent orange underwear. So 2 weeks into the show, something really interesting happened. One of the plants that were donated to me actually bloomed almost fluorescent orange flowers, matching exactly to the interior of it. So that's not Photoshop. That's like, it perfectly matched, and everybody thought I did all this research on the plant and found one and made it bloom. It was sheer coincidence, but it was really interesting. And in my paintings, there's always a lot of room for play and chance. And I like that in the sculpture, even though it was a little bit more planned and I had people helping me, there was this like unexpected moment that was like a happy accident that happened. And I tried to bring that into the work that I'm doing now even. So this is another piece. So you can kind of see how it starts. There's no planning for these structures. Like I might draw like a loose contour of the sculpture, but it's like I'm not a sculptor, so I don't know how to measure stuff or cut things at an angle. Like I don't know anything. So it's literally me collaging wood on top of one another until we figure out a shape and somehow it stays stable. So that's how it ended up. So literally there was no planning. Like I knew there was going to be a window, but I didn't know that it was going to be kind of like one side was going to be like straight vertical line, the other side was going to be cut at an angle. And this piece is called the Love Healing Center. And I made a zine for it that interviewed 10 artists. And I interviewed them all about their first failed love. And so everybody answered these random questions that I had about, their like failed first love, like the first person they fell in love with. And based on their responses, I taught myself how to make coil pots, and I made a ceramic pot for each plant. And then I went to a cactus center, and I found the cacti or a succulent that matched their relationship. I mean, it made completely no sense. I just based, like if somebody's relationship was like really messy, I got one that had like really big crazy thorns, or So, and the idea was that this terrarium, which has plant grow lights inside, the idea was that these plants are, these pots that stood for the relationship. The pots are keeping the plants alive. It's keeping the water in. But, if you pot plants, after a while, you need to repot them or put them in a bigger pot because they outgrow the relationship. So it stood for this, it was like a stand-in for how your first relationship, your first serious relationship. It's this sweet, amazing thing that's like very nurturing. You feel amazing. But most of the time, you outgrow it and you have to kind of move on to bigger and better things or bigger and better pots. So this room, so none of these plants were watered during the entire show, and these grow lights kind of kept the plants alive, and it got really humid in there, and like the glass got a lot of condensation. So it also was like a giant, like a rehab space for these plants that weren't getting any nurturing. So there's like another shot of it. And I have no idea how to make coil pots, by the way. Like it was literally like the pots were like really wonky and rough. And but for me, the relationships, most of these relationships were really rough. They weren't polished, really. Like, most of these people had never dated anyone before. So I kind of wanted the pots to kind of have that same look. And so at the end of the month, at the end of these shows, I usually just take them apart and throw them out. I throw out all the wood. Maybe I save some of the planters and reuse them. Maybe I save a couple of 2x4s, but it's really hard to sell things like that. So they're just up for the duration of the show. And so when I was taking this apart, I took this photo on the left. When I took it back home, I was like, hey, there's something interesting. Like, I started thinking about how I was building these structures and how I'm literally collaging found wood that had some paint on it or had some marks on it. And I had the idea to maybe start incorporating collage into my paintings. So this is the first painting that I made inspired by that process. And so this has remnants of old paintings, failed paintings that, I never showed. So like this white pattern. This is a piece of paper, like a giant sheet of paper that I painted that pattern on. And there was another painting underneath it. There's all these different elements from other paintings. So I started taking that, even though I was primarily a painter, the sculptures informed the paintings. And I started using that same process in a 2D manner. So like the flowers on that plant are little cut pieces of paper of another painting that had like a big swatch of green on it. And again, this is built really intuitively, very quickly. And again, it's paper mounted to canvas. So, and there's all sorts of stuff from ink to watercolor to mylar. Here's another painting from that time. So the paintings started turning into these like imaginary still life / forts. Sometimes they would look like these pedestals. Sometimes they look like these structures. And it was like the paintings and the sculptures really started melding together. And I went back to Sharjah again. To Dubai for a art fair. And when I went there, this is like at Dubai's height. So literally, this is just on the freeway, and there was so much construction happening there. I mean, this is like one little tiny strip. So imagine like 5 miles of just this. And there were so many buildings with cranes on them that you couldn't tell if everything was getting taken down or being built up. It was insane. I mean, it's still insane there, but this is the world's tallest building, and this is like at its halfway point. So it went up another, God knows how many flights. So, this was, I was going back and forth to Dubai because that was the only place I was showing. So I think this stuff kind of influenced me, like all this like construction and deconstruction. It was influencing my work. I didn't recognize it at the time, but like I saw this on the way from the airport to the hotel, and then without having any previous plans, I built this structure, which kind of has this like jutting thing going up into the sky, and so there's some relationships there. And it took me, sometimes it would take me like a year later when I was like, oh wow, I was completely influenced by this, image that I saw like a year ago. So this was a piece that I built for Art Dubai, which is a fair out there. It was built on site. The inside of it is covered, see all that pink pattern? It's kind of like a Islamic or Middle Eastern pattern, and it's different shades of pink. Here, that's kind of a better photo of it. So it looks like this like really rich, luxurious pattern, but this is actually a really cheap Luan wood, and that I just happened upon at a hardware store out there. And the guy that I bought it from, he told me that it comes in a bunch of different patterns and colors, and it's really cheap material, and the silk screen registration is completely off. And he told me that they make this patterned wood in Africa, and they ship it to Dubai, and it's for like really poor people's like shacks. So they would like, to spice up the interiors of these like really cheap shacks, they would like use this material so it would look like pretty inside. So we chopped it up, we bought it and we chopped it up, and we kind of did a mosaic of the entire inside of the fort. And that was kind of interesting because usually when you find these patterns, they're done in like tile or marble and these mosques, so they're done in like a mosaic as well. So it's kind of interesting to reference that with like big jaggedy pieces of wood. And like these little black balls, these are all like little pieces of tar that I found in the ocean there. It's really weird, like they had like wet tar like in the beach. So I just got it and I balled it up and I made it into these like little trinkets or little mementos. So there's like a lot of stuff that I would just find along the way in the trip that I would just incorporate into the work. So there was this, act of chance. And this is a fun photo. These are my artist assistants. They painted in their burqas for 4 days straight. So a year later, I went back to Dubai again, and this is the most recent installation. So this was for the Sharjah Biennial, which is Sharjah is a town right outside of Dubai. And this is called Watchtower / Eclipse. And so in the museum, there's 3 levels, and they have this giant atrium where you can kind of access it from all 3 levels of the museum. So in like this one, this is the 2nd level. So the structure, you're at eye level with it on the 2nd floor. And on the 3rd floor, you can look down on it, so you can lean over and look down on the atrium. And then on the ground level, this is the ground level, you can look up. So it's kind of like a giant watchtower, like kind of think like a prison tower, just a square structure. It's 2 stories high, and there's a skylight on the 3rd, on the roof. So the sunlight would come all the way down to 3 levels, and so I wanted to create a structure that kind of blocked the sunlight on the 2nd level. So this cactus right here, he is getting his sunlight from these grow lights that are. So he's getting artificial light from underneath the structure. And then the plants that are on this level are getting sunlight from the skylight. So it was just kind of like creating this like eclipse feel. And then all the stuff that's on the structure, half of the objects are like personal mementos from my house. So like photos of my parents on their like honeymoon, like little trinkets, like little pieces of rocks from like hikes that I found in LA. And then I also went to bazaars in Sharjah and bought these like cheap piggy banks that I thought were kind of interesting. But then I also mixed in these fabricated ceramic sculptures that I had made in LA. So there's this mix of like imaginary objects, imaginary like trinkets or like things that you would find on your during your travels, and then things that I actually did collect, throughout my years. And then so along with these 4 paintings, with this structure was these 4 paintings that went around the room, and they were imaginary blueprints for the structure. So I built that structure on site. So these paintings were made in Los Angeles, and they were like roughs. Well, they weren't sketches, but they were meant to be like sketches for what the structure might look like. And these are big. They're all 7 by 5 feet. There's another one. But when I went and did the show, I didn't really follow it. This was kind of like very elaborate thumbnail sketches. So I'm going to jump around a little bit just so we don't go on forever. But so a little bit later, I got a phone call from my mom one day, and she was asking me, we were just talking about some show I just had, and she was like, Amir, I really wish you would like give me a piece of art. And I'm like, Mom, your attic is like filled with artwork, just grab one and pack it up. And she's like, no, I want something from me. And I'm sure some of you have had that experience where your parents want something, but they don't want something you make. They want like whatever they like, but they want you to make it, So I was like, Mom, I make all this weird artwork. Like, you're not going to like any of it. She was like, make me something beautiful, like with a lake or a pond, geese, ducks, a cat, some flowers. I was like, she wanted me to make like a Thomas Kincaid painting. And so I was like, fine, I'll make you something. So as a joke, I started making this huge painting. This is, again, 7 by 5 feet. And I was like, I'm going to make this crazy flower painting for my mom. And technically it's a flower painting, so she's going to love it. And, I wasn't planning on showing it. It was just kind of like a big elaborate joke. But halfway through it, I was like, hey, I kind of like this painting. I don't want to give it to her. I started, like, the more I got into it, the more I realized I was like, hey, there's something going on here. It's interesting. It's like taking this cliche image of like a floral still life, a bouquet, and trying to like do it in my aesthetic, but also trying to like breathe some new life into it. And so what this is there's a couple of different things. There's flowers that are actually painted by me, like, you know, like representationally. And then there's photocopies of flowers that I found on Flickr, and I like would like manipulate their colors and then print them out archivally and then cut them out and glue them on there. And then there's pieces of cut paper that are cut kind of into silhouettes of flowers. So there, again, kind of like with that, kind of going along with that last sculpture or installation I showed you, where there's this like mix between like artificiality and reality, you know, like these like, you know, this like representation of a flower, an abstraction of a flower, an actual image of a flower, and then my interpretation of a flower. So there was like this really interesting like push and pull where from like different distances, you know, you would think a photograph of a flower was a painting, and then you get closer and you realize, oh, it's just a digital printout of a flower, and then you'd see like a silhouette of a flower from far away and it would look like a real flower. So, you know, there was this like interesting push and pull happening. And I also liked how it was like, because I had no expectations, there wasn't a lot of thinking involved. I was just kind of making it, and I couldn't really mess it up. So it gave me a lot of freedom to play with materials and techniques. And so I came up with like a lot of like, in my later work, there's like a lot of patterning and embellishing, and a lot of that kind of evolved from making this painting and the paintings that came after it. So I made this painting. I didn't give it to my mom. I'm terrible. And I decided I was going to show it at a show. And I showed it, and it's called the Ultimate Mom Painting. And it was the first thing to sell at the show, and his son bought it for his mother. And then I had a smaller version, and he bought that one for himself. So I was like, you know, and there was like literally a swarm of like, you know, old ladies that were all moms standing around this painting, like being like, yeah, this is the one. You know, it was like it hit the target demographic. You know, like they all loved it. I could have probably sold it like 20 times over. So it was, I don't know, it was interesting because it was like this. It was almost it became kind of this like shrine to my mom. It was kind of poking fun at her like expectations of me, but also like celebrating her at the same time, which I thought was interesting. So this painting actually led to like a bunch of similar floral work, and it's kind of turned into this ongoing project. And so I do them every once in a while as a kind of like a break in between new paintings. So I'm going to jump around a little bit more, but this is a painting from around that same time. This one's called, I did a whole show about different ways that people alter their reality. So, and the show was in San Francisco, and I made paintings about like drug culture, new age, kind of like healing, crystals, things like that, and also about LARPs. You guys know anybody know what a LARP is? Live action role playing. So all of these things, like there are different ways to like alter your reality, whether you're a LARP and you like to dress up like, you know, some sort of like zombie and play pretend in the woods, or, you know, you like to smoke a lot of weed and just space out and laugh, or, you know, or you like to like do like Reiki and like heal people with your hands, or, you know, take aura photos. I've always been really interested in the aesthetics of all these worlds. I'm really cynical, and I don't actually take part in any of it. Like, I've never smoked pot. I'm not interested in any of it except for the aesthetics. Like when you see those like psychic ads in newspapers and it's got this crazy rainbow in the background, like I get really excited. I'm like, oh, this thing's awesome looking, you know, but I don't believe in any of it at all. So I made this show that kind of celebrated and kind of spoke about all that. So this painting's called Bongs Away, and it's a bunch of bongs set up as a still life with flowers, like so. So they're just kind of like these like tasteful vases, you know, but they're also bongs. And then I won't show you all the paintings from the show, but this is another one. This is a LARP painting. So there's like, these are all photos of actual people that do live action role playing. I found them all online. And then I manipulated the colors. I redrew some of them. And kind of like the base is kind of set up like a chessboard, you know, because there's all this like strategy. I watched this great documentary about how, like, they have like a LARP camp somewhere, and they go, you know, it's like, I mean, these people are grown adults, they're not kids, but they go and like they just pretend for a week straight. It sounds amazing. So even though I'm an outsider in all these worlds, I'm really fascinated by the aesthetics, you know, like they make all these costumes. It's almost like Burning Man. I would never go except to be like, you know, if I could go invisibly and just like watch everybody. So after this work, like you can see this one's a little bit more like figurative. There's figures involved. I kind of hit a wall and I was trying to figure out what the next body of work was going to be. And I started thinking about playing pretend and like kind of where I started with the forts. And I decided to take a series of photographs and base paintings on them, where these photos would be a portrait of someone, but it would be a portrait through their personal belongings. So this is the first one. And so what I did was, this is actually of my wife. And one day she had like piles of clothes everywhere. She was like, our bedroom was a little messy. And I was like, hey, stand right here. It was like 11 o'clock at night. And I just had this idea out of nowhere. So I was like, stand still, don't move. I took all her clothes and I just dumped them all on her head. And I took this photo and then I painted it. So at this point, the idea wasn't really clear as to what I wanted to do with it. But I realized that I wanted it to be a portrait, but I wanted it to be not a straightforward portrait where somebody's just sitting and looking pretty or nice. I wanted it to be fragmented. I like how like you kind of lose the body in some parts and it just turns into this like blob of like pattern and fabric. And so like this is actually like this purple and white thing. This is all cut paper, like hundreds of pieces of paper that's airbrushed. I airbrushed like a checkered pattern on it. And then instead of drawing the folds on the paper, I just cut it into shape. It's kind of hard to tell in the image, but you can kind of see here, like you see how there's like the edge of the paper here kind of shows like that's a crease in the fabric. And then so these crystals and gems, these are actually like really precious gems, like from some like diamond collection. It's a book that my wife had because she's really into like diamonds and expensive jewelry. So she's like surrounded, you can see she's surrounded by like expensive stuff. So this is all like, this is like a photo of a dime, or of like this gem, and then there's like a painting of one, and then there's this is like a cut paper collage in the shape of it. So again, dealing with that play between, you know, representation and artificiality. And then so all the skin is painted in oil paint, and it's the last thing that I painted. And the reason for that was I wanted to have this, like my paintings tend to be really flat, kind of graphic, especially in reproduction. And I wanted the skin to be the one part that was kind of alive. It was like chunky and felt like it had like blood coursing through its vein, even though it's like really marked and, you know, it almost looks scarred. So oil paint it's just really alive. It's not like acrylic paint. And so I just thought that oil would really work out well for it. So in all the images I'm about to show you, the skin is the only part that's in oil. Everything else is collage and a bunch of different materials. So that's actually a photo of one of the early ones. Again, that's my wife. Don't tell her I showed you this. So I was like literally just piling all this stuff on it. And I would make a lot of changes during the process. So that photo turned into this painting. So there's elements of reality in there, but there's I'm taking a lot of liberties. So one of the reasons for that is, you know, if you think about like the history of portraiture and all paintings, even history paintings, it's, you know, like at a certain point the artist wants to kind of make the image a good image and not necessarily be subservient to the original image. So the black in this, you know, this black robe, I just didn't like that black robe. As an image, as a painting, it wasn't going to be interesting, so I just made it pink. Right. So I'll take a lot of liberties and things like that. So, and then the plants at the bottom, these are all plants from our house. They're just like everyday mundane things that we have. Nothing's like precious or it's just sentimental value. So here's another painting. This is 6 by 4 feet. Again, this is based on a photograph. So this guy, he's like a bachelor. He's really into sports, and he's a lawyer. And he's pretty young, so he doesn't really have a lot of sentimental things. He's just kind of like a dude living in this like really mundane apartment with like really nothing in it. It was like really challenging to find anything that had any kind of personal meaning. So when I asked him, what are some objects that have some meaning to you? He said, oh, my basketball shoes, they're my lucky basketball shoes, so they're down here. And then his grandfather was also a lawyer, so he has his grandfather's like old briefcase. So that's down here. So these photographs, as I started doing them with other people, it was kind of fun because I had to go and figure out how to paint a shoe and make it not boring and make it work in my painting and in my world. So it became this like, I never knew what was going to happen. I never knew what somebody was going to pull out, and formally that was really interesting to me. But also like trying to make it all work was a challenge. It wasn't like the previous work where I just did whatever I wanted. At a certain point I was subservient to what they had laying around and who they were as a person. So there's like a little detail. And you can see the red, white, and blue blanket. That's all cut paper. It's like thousands of little pieces of paper. There's another painting from that era. Here's another one. The little Pee Wee Herman doll. This is my friend Krista. She works in the apparel industry, and she actually creates a lot of repeating patterns for like floral prints and stuff. So this one's called Ruler of the Repeating Pattern. So you can see there's like a repeating pattern there. And some of these patterns are things that she actually designed. This is a guy, his name's Jason Redwood. He's actually from Santa Barbara. Do you? Oh, yeah, that's Jason. So he's like partially Native American. I think this like crazy staff thing was like somebody in his family like handed it down to him. So that's his dog Diego, and all these objects are just like things that he just had laying around. The photo shoot took maybe like 10 minutes. So it's not like, it wasn't like a highly produced thing. It was me with my digital camera, sometimes with my iPhone, just taking a quick snapshot. Here's a couple more recent flower paintings. So you can see they're getting a little bit more elaborate. This is a fairly new one. It's pretty big. It's 8 by 6 feet. That's a new one too. That's also big, 8 by 6 feet. And then here's just this is some stuff I'm working on now. The painting on the left I just finished, and it's for a show in San Francisco in March. So that's it for my artwork. This is kind of like, that's my studio right now. And then I'll just go really quick into some of the other stuff I do. So aside from all the artwork, I started this magazine in 1996 called Beautiful Decay. It was kind of like a black and white photocopy zine. And over the years, it's changed a couple of times. It was like a magazine. Now it's kind of like a book that you can subscribe to. It really is like I don't sell it as something that's an extension of my artwork, but it really is, because it's just like a really elaborate zine. It's just artists whose work that I like, whether they're in fine art or they're designers or illustrators or photographers. It's just a work that influences me or that I'm interested in. So there's no editorial meetings. There's no, like I get to pick what's in it. So it's a very self-serving project, but it's gotten, a little bit of popularity, and people kind of decided to subscribe to it and follow it. So it's kind of gotten bigger and bigger over the years. So we have an online website where we feature artists, I think like 5 or 6 times every day. And it's just been this ongoing project that I've done while I've been, working on my art career. And so it's been, it's got its good things and bad things. I get to meet a lot of interesting people, a lot of interesting artists. It's opened some doors, but it also takes up a lot of my time. So it's kind of a constant struggle juggling this and my painting career, because when you do something like this, sometimes people think, oh, well, you're a publisher, you're not a painter. And for me, it was never like that. I didn't have a business plan or anything like that. It just happened that this turned into, a real thing that could so instead of teaching or working for another artist, I do this on the side. So this is some spreads from the new book that just came out. Did an interview with James Goebel and Tim Noble and Sue Webster and a bunch of other people. So as an extension of Beautiful Decay, I also have been, from time to time, I create some shows or special projects. So this is some work from a recent art auction I put together with 50 artists from all over the country. All this work and the other 50 artists, everybody made 7 by 10 inch paintings, and we auctioned them off starting at I think $100. And the concept was to do like a really grassroots charity event to support the art community, the young art community. So all of these artists are, most of them are like under the age of 40, and they've all been in art school and know what it's like to have a bunch of tuition fees and have to buy books and supplies. So the concept was really simple. Me and the directors at Mark Moore Gallery, where the auction was held at, we would go and do studio visits with local Southern California grad students, and we would give one merit-based scholarship. So whoever's work we liked the best, they would just get all the proceeds from the event. So the money didn't go to a charity or nonprofit that had admin fees. It didn't, you knew exactly who got the money. So we had the event. It was pretty good. We had a ton of people show up, and we raised $11,000 and gave this artist, Alexis McKenzie, who goes to Cal State Long Beach, we gave her $11,000. So, it was just a way that me and a bunch of fellow artists could get together and just help another artist, just to give them that little extra boost, that they need in their career. So I do some stuff like this sometimes. And then another project that I'm working on, which also relates to, it comes out of Beautiful Decay, was, we get, at Beautiful Decay, we get like literally hundreds of artist submissions every week. And, sometimes it's like a link to their blog, or some people send me links to their Facebook page, and sometimes they just send me these giant, massive files that like clog up my email box. And after you get like 10,000 emails over a couple of years, like you want to look at everything, but some people just don't have the means to have like a really nice, professional portfolio. So there was a couple of companies out there that kind of allowed you to like build a website really quickly online, and I had tried a couple of them, and I was like, this is such a great idea, but some of them were just too hard to use if you don't know anything about web design. So my wife and I, with another friend who's a developer, we came up with the idea to do this online web platform called Made with Color, and this is something that we just launched the other day. So pretty much it's an all-in-one website builder. So you can go on, you pay, it's for like the same cost of like hosting a website, like just a domain hosting, and you can put together a website literally in 5 minutes. So I have my own personal site on there, and I literally 5 minutes I put it together, and and it looks professional, so that like if you have to contact a gallery, or you need to send a link to an editor at a magazine or whoever, you can you can have something that looks legit, and it's not like a link to your Facebook page where it also has photos of you like partying with your friends. So anyways, we just launched it, and again, this idea there was no grand business idea. It just came out of me getting all these portfolios and going to my wife and being like, man, these people just send me these bad looking sites, and I don't want to look at them because they're so, they're like flash, and it's got music playing, and it takes 15 minutes to load, and I just wanted to have something really simple that me and my friends could use to promote our own work. So so this is the most recent thing, and actually, if any of you are interested, the website is madewithcolor.com. amir.com, and I made a little discount code for you guys if you want to check it out. So yeah. So thank you, and if any of you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thanks.
So we have a couple minutes. We'll just open it up to questions. And Gloria, could you get the lights again? What was that code?
Oh,
Oh.
sorry. Give me a second. I'll pull it back up. Hold on.
Also, for those of you who might be leaving, I did post Professor Bates' sign-up sheet on the door there near Nathan. If anybody's looking for it.
Oh,
Sorry.
the code was MYMWC Site 10, SITE 10. I'll put it back up.
Amir, I have a question
Yeah.
about the paints, actually.
Uh-huh.
I'm curious about the kind of coiling border.
Mm-hmm.
That was my question too.
I stole it from
Uh-huh.
you. The almost neon kind of coiling border.
Mm-hmm.
And just as we're kind of going forward in time, I noticed that the border starts to kind of emerge forward
Right.
in the foreground
Mm-hmm.
and is kind of cutting into the composition more, whereas before it obeyed almost the frame of
The
reference, like
edge,
a
right.
Persian miniature.
Yeah.
And so my question though is regarding that, when you're working out the composition for these, are you doing a lot of drawings and collages and then they become big paintings?
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So the new paintings, the figurative work that I've been doing the last 2 years, all of those, I have the photograph. Then I take that photograph, I put it into Photoshop, I cut out all the background, and I do a rough drawing of like the platform that they're kind of standing or sitting on. And then I trace that, I print it out, I trace it, I project it, start painting. And then 20% of the way into the painting, I actually take a photo of the painting again, put it back into Photoshop, and I might start adding elements. So if there's a plant that wasn't part of the original composition, but I took a photo of it in their house, I might take that photo, cut out the plant, and put it into the image of the real painting and move it around. So I don't really do like a traditional sketch, it's more like digital. And that's kind of based on just doing the magazine. I'm just really comfortable on the computer. So anyway, so that's how I do that. But then the border is usually the last thing it's like one of the last elements I do. And I started breaking it, making it kind of weave in and out. Because I just got bored of doing the regular, just going around the edge. But I like the idea of deconstructing the border, but also having it be this like visual guide for your eye to go in and out of different parts of the painting. So I kind of think of it as like a roadmap of where I want you to stop, you know, and also it helps me to push elements forward and push things back. And I recently, in one of the last painting images of the studio shot, I started incorporating text into the paintings. So there's these letters. They're pretty abstract. So it actually goes back kind of like what I was doing in undergrad, where there's like typography and graffiti in there. So there's these letters, and I'm having some of the letters float on top of, like, let's say my shirt. There'll be a letter floating right on top of my shirt with like a shadow. You know, it doesn't make sense in reality. Like that letter doesn't exist. But in some other parts, like a letter might be like sitting on the ground, and it'll have a shadow on the floor, you know, and casts a shadow, and that's another way of like me creating an image that has some depth and also flattening it at the same time. So depending on where you look, it might create depth, or it might completely flatten that area and make it completely graphic. I don't know if does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have ongoing contractual relationships with some galleries, and can you describe how that developed and how that was done?
Yeah. So I'm represented by the Third Line which is in Dubai, which is that first gallery that I started showing with. So they've been great. Like I said, when I first started, I didn't have any options, and you know, they were the only person that contacted me. So I was like, what do I have to lose? But since then, they've gone to become like the biggest gallery in the Middle East, and they do really well. And you know, yeah, it's been really great. So I work with them regularly, and I have a couple of shows coming up with them. So they're great. And then I also work with a gallery in San Francisco called Frey Norris, which is where I'm going to have my show in March. So yeah, I work with those two galleries. I've worked with different galleries. You know, I've shown with some galleries in New York and in LA, and you know, sometimes they go out of business or they change their programming, or I'm not happy and I leave. I mean, you know, it's hard. You know, it's like getting married to somebody. So when I was younger, I was very eager to show with whoever would show me, and I would just kind of roll the dice just because I wanted to show really bad. And as I've gotten older, I've realized I want to be a little choosy, you know, like, because it's a relationship, and if the relationship falls apart, it's really messy. So you really don't want to commit unless you're really in love. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good way of explaining it. It's if I could give any advice to anyone like that's like right out of grad school or ready to show, I would say it's much better to slow down and do a bunch of group shows, even if they're at alternative spaces or nonprofits, than to just jump headfirst into like a long-term commitment with someone, because usually it doesn't go. You know, like the first show I had in New York was at a gallery where when I showed up with all my work, the first thing the dealer said to me was, so what collectors do you have in New York City? And I was like, I just came from LA. I don't have any collectors here. I'm fresh out of grad school. Why are you, that's a question I should be asking you, you know? And like, that's when I knew I was in trouble. And it was like terrible, you know? It was just, so I, you know, and my gut, you know, and I had some reservations about going into that relationship, and I should have just listened to my instincts and just been a little bit more patient. So, yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay.